Welcome to OnNET, a weekly chat with the .NET team and guests. And today our guest is Jonathan Chambers from Unity. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello. Great to be here.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
This is cool.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us what Unity is all about?
So Unity, if you don't know, is a video game engine and some other things. But the reason I'm here is because we use .NET as basically our scripting language. So when our users make games in our editor, they use that in a .NET-based language, most frequently Fsharp. And we do that with a variety of different engines actually today. We ship with Mono, which you had Miguel here, I think, on your first first talk. And we actually use a couple of different .NET runtimes, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Cool. And this is cross-platform, right?
Yeah, we're probably supporting .NET across the most platforms of anybody, I think, at this point. We're running on somewhere between 20 and 30 different platforms, depending on how you count things. Yeah, but basically, all the desktop platforms, all the mobile platforms, console platforms, WebGL, and we're basically running the users' .NET code on all those different platforms.
Wow, that's very cool. So you're supporting, of course, all of the current generation consoles, the last generation consoles, phones.
Yes.
So that's the three big phone platforms, desktop platforms, and even the web, right?
Yes, even the web. Yes, pretty recent.
So how do you run .NET code on the web?
Okay, so I said we had a couple different .NET runtimes. So I guess this was 2 or 3 years ago now. We knew WebGL was going to be a great target for us. And we had a couple other things going on underway at the company, looking into research of how we want to run .NET in the future. And WebGL came along, and it seemed to be sort of the most restricted platform that we would need to run. And at that point, we were already running or compiling the engine code. So we had compiled our C++ engine into JavaScript, and we could do some basic things like animation, but we couldn't run any user script content. And, I see Rich joined.
Yeah. Hi, Rich.
Hi, how are you? Sorry I'm late. I had some authentication troubles.
Okay, that's fine. We started without you.
That was a good plan.
We're just talking about how we run .NET on WebGL. Or Unity
awesome.
code on WebGL.
Yeah, and I think that's something that not so many people are aware of, that you can even do that. So I think it's really interesting to dig into that a little bit. So you're actually translating IL into C++?
Yes, that's what we're doing. So we had a previous effort to run .NET on Flash, basically, from Unity, and we had converted actually C# at that point. So we were converting C# and actually decompiling the IL back into a C# AST, and then trying to generate ActionScript from that. But in this case, what we decided to do is work at the IL level, and we actually convert IL into C++. And then we can basically target any platform with a C++ compiler.
And in the case of the browser, you are using mscripten to run the C++ code on the browser.
Yeah, it's important to note we're not generating sort of idiomatic C++. So it doesn't look like you took your C# and you wrote it in C++. We're actually converting the IL. So it looks a lot more like the IL. If you look at IL and ILSpy or ILDASM, we're generating C++ that looks very similar to that. And it makes use of all the things that a normal .NET runtime would. So we're using a GC still, and we have access to metadata. Things run as they would anywhere else. So it's not like we're sort of transforming your code into the way you'd write C++. We're just using C++ as sort of the standard code format that we want to use to target platforms.
How is performance with that?
It's really good. I leave most of that up to the mscripting guys. It's pretty impressive, the performance they get out of things. In general, with the C++, part of the reason we did out a CPP, that's what we call our technology where we convert IL into the C++ code. Part of the reason we did that was because we saw all these platforms that we wanted to target already had very optimized C and C++ compilers. And when we were trying to port the JIT or the AOT engine to those platforms, we weren't taking advantage of any of that, right? We might have had 1 or 2 guys maybe working on it. And what we see with the C and C++ that we output is we get sort of all the benefits that handwritten C or C++ would on those platforms. And again, in the case of mscripten, it's pretty good. most of the sort of little benchmarks we run, we actually get better performance, I would say, from our mscripting cross-compiled code running in the actual browser than we were getting in our plugin before. And that's sort of just on raw code performance. We don't see that in a couple cases. Some things that the web doesn't have today, so sort of multi-threaded code in places where we could have multi-threaded code before. You can't do that in mscripting today or in the browsers today. And in the case where we had some code using something like SIMD, we won't use that in the browser as well. But just general C# code, if you would write it and run it in the browser via mscripting, you usually see a better performance than we were getting before with our web plugin.
Excellent. Better than the plugin. Yeah, and yeah, in case people didn't get that part, you're running Unity games in the browser without a plugin.
Yes, yeah, that was sort of what Unity was known for a long time ago, was the browser plugin, and sort of where we made our name. And that was running sort of a native plugin in the browsers, and was doing just-in-time compilation with the Mono runtime at that point. And I mean, as you know, with ahead-of-time compilation, which is what we do, you give the compilers a lot more time to optimize your code rather than jitting it in process to the browser.
Cool. Very cool.
Cool. Yeah, it sounded pretty crazy when we started it. I mean, it was sort of a backroom discussion, and then
I was blown away when I saw it running first. I mean, that was really something that I didn't expect to work so well. So what does your market share look like in the gaming engine industry? Not talking about .NET, but talking about the industry in general.
That's hard to say. I don't have specific numbers. I will say that there's a lot of competition in the space right now, but Unity is, I think, a really good option for especially people getting started. So we sort of scale. That was one of the things Unity does, I think, well, is scale from one person wants to try to make a game on their own, all the way up to studios making large games.
Right. That's something that really speaks to me, because I started programming, like many people. I started programming with video games a long time ago, and at that time, one or two people could create a video game and then sell it, and it was indistinguishable from actual video game companies producing games in some cases. And that kind of disappeared for a while, and then indie games came back, and it seems like Unity is a really good option for indie games that are being created by a small team or even by beginners. Yes, it's a good intro to game programming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we provide a lot of value. I mean, the fact that we're using .NET obviously speaks to that not everybody's an expert in C and C++, which was sort of historically the languages of the game industry. And there's a lot of sort of things where we try to say we do the hard things so you don't have to. So porting these things to different platforms and ensuring you get good performance in the sort of safety of C# and .NET is something we sort of pride ourselves on and are trying to get that message across.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I remember. So how long have you been doing this? How old is Unity?
So Unity is let's see. I think we are about 10 years old. It sort of evolved throughout history from the actual start date. I can't give it an exact date.
Yeah, and 10 years ago, if you spoke with video game professionals, they would almost have laughed at you for even considering using something like C# in gaming, right? It was all C++ at the time.
You're right. There's still a lot of discussions about it today, even.
Yeah.
But I think there's sort of diminishing returns now, is what you see. So even at Unity, we sort of have C++ code and we have C# code, and the advantages of C++ sort of shrink a little over time as more and more things come to C# and as the runtimes get better. The sort of rewards you get for the pain of maybe dealing with memory management and stuff yourself just isn't there.
And why is that? What changed?
I think the devices are constantly getting more powerful. So if you look at the mobile devices, especially when a new platform comes out and it's resource constrained, that's where the discussion comes back up again, right? Whether a phone is powerful enough to run these games fast enough. And as they get faster and faster, the other thing is, of course, the runtimes are getting sort of better and better. And again, I'll speak to at least out of CPP for us. We made some trade-offs there, but it's really good in getting us about, again, as good of performance as you can get with handwritten C or C++, with a couple of caveats, like, again, you might have to have some overhead to handle things like type safety when you're doing casting, for example, or array bounds checks. But when we're leveraging something like that, you're getting about the same performance as you would have done with handwritten C++ without the pain of doing it yourself.
So we talked briefly about the cross-platform aspect of Unity. How painful is it to port a game between platforms? What differences do you have, and what are the limitations? I imagine there is a limit to cross-platform. I mean, you won't build the same game for an iPhone and an Xbox One. So how do people look at that? I mean, there are some games that actually do work, but so what level of effort does it take to do a cross-platform game?
So the platforms of similar devices is not too hard. So if you wanted to target desktops, and we support Linux, Mac, OS X, and Windows, it's relatively easy to support those different platforms. There's some things you need to consider. If you want to integrate in some sort of platform-specific APIs or access some platform-specific resources, you have to consider that. But the vast majority of the game code you're writing and assets you're pulling in, we take care of everything to make that work on the different platforms. The big divide we see, I guess maybe on some different platforms, is whether there's a JIT available or whether it's sort of an AOT device. So some of the devices we run on have security restrictions, and that seems to be maybe one of the biggest bars that people do, is they bring in some code. I think you guys know with your .NET Native and other approaches that the code may need jitting at runtime, and that's something people hit when they first encounter that. They wrote their code not thinking about that. They run it on a device where JIT, the compiler, is not available, and then they need to reconsider how they do serialization or how they do code generation.
Okay. Is garbage collection still a big issue for games?
Yeah, we don't have the greatest garbage collector in Unity today. We're sort of actively working on it. That's one of the things in our near-term roadmap. And the big thing with garbage collectors in games is latency. So when you talk about garbage collectors, are sort of like throughput and latency, sort of how much can you collect at a time versus how long does it take to pause and actually do that collection. And the real big thing for games is the latency. So we're trying to move from sort of one large stop-the-world collection, which is what we use today in Unity, to a more incremental approach, or background GC even. So yeah,
latency,
so it's a big deal.
Latency is also a big deal for a lot of server scenarios. So
yes.
You're in good company there. So is one of the appeals of .NET Core for you maybe the new JIT that comes with it, or?
I think the GC is probably more appealing right now.
No, the GC, sorry.
Yes. We talked to Rich a while ago about that when you guys first talked about .NET Core and it first came out there, and we have taken a look at it, and it's definitely one of the options we're considering. I think there's some platform considerations with where it can run today and what we would need to do to sort of integrate it into the runtimes we're using. But yeah, I mean that was one of the first things we looked at. We know that our garbage collecting story is one of the weak points right now.
Sorry, I had to jump off a Ken there. I'm all good now. So you talked a little bit about cross-platform, and you mentioned the obvious ones like Mac, Linux, and Windows, and there's obviously iOS and Android. Are there any more kind of niche platforms that you support? Like, I think you support the consoles too, or no?
Yeah, we do support all the consoles, sort of current gen and last gen, and yeah, different platforms come up from time to time. I'm not sure of like a good example. And WebGL is probably the most niche one. When you talk about a platform doesn't have, again, as of today, doesn't have threads, doesn't have a lot of the things that you sort of take for granted. So that's probably the most niche one. For example, on WebGL, we were just talking about a GC, and one of the things that the garbage collector runs, it sort of scans from the roots, right? And that's sort of maybe your static variables and your thread stacks. And we don't have access to thread stacks in mscripton, in WebGL. So what we do today is we just make sure we schedule the garbage collector to run at basically the top of a frame in a user's game when we're sure that they're not running any code on any thread stacks at that point. We have sort of native at the top of our frame, and we run that garbage collector then.
Makes sense. Totally different topic. I've noticed that these like external discrete graphics boxes are becoming popular. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Is there anything that you guys at Unity have to do to take advantage of those boxes in your game, or is it pretty transparent to your engine?
It's usually transparent to our users. Anytime technologies like that come out, we try to make it easy as possible for them to take advantage of that. But that's way out of my area, so I can't say too much more than that.
Okay, good to go. Different topic then. When I talk to people on my team, they often about half of them say that their first programming experience was building a game, as opposed to like a calculator or something like that. And I'm guessing that there are some people that still do that, choose gaming as their first thing. I think Bertrand said that gaming was his first thing. So what's the best way to start if you're not like super crazy programmer like you, John, but you want to learn about programming and you're super interested in games? How would I start with Unity?
So I'll say maybe even before Unity, there's like a couple cool things out there. My son, who's 11 now, but I mean for a couple years he's been using something called Scratch. It's sort of like a visual programming thing from MIT, I think.
Yeah.
And you can make 2D games and stuff in there pretty quickly. And I've never actually talked to him much about like programming concepts, but he immediately picks up, oh, there's this loop thing, and there's this if check I do, and there's these different things, and he finds out things like maybe like tolerances, right? So he's like, when this thing touches this thing, I want to do something, and he realizes that maybe sometimes it's not going to exactly touch it. You need to like penetrate it or something. So you learn a lot just doing something like that. But once you can get beyond that and do a little bit of programming, Unity again. I know we talk about C# a lot, but we still have Unity script in there, so that's a little more forgiving. But
Scratch was a great example. I think another one that is very appealing to kids is Minecraft. And there is a number of programming options with Minecraft. You have actually elements in Minecraft that behave in quasi-procedural ways, so you can build machines, which is the first approach to programming, and you can also script the game. But for that, you already need to understand what the language is and so on. So I wanted to mention Minecraft here.
It's pretty impressive how many games today. Again, my son plays a lot. A lot of them are about user-generated content.
Yes.
I mean, so when we played games, it was beating levels, right? I mean, we got this game cartridge, and we put it in, and we played it, and we beat what was there. And it seems like a majority.
What Fallout 4 is doing is amazing. And what people are doing in Fallout 4 is even more amazing. So yeah.
So it's really interesting to see how much of gaming today is really designing your own levels or programming the games to sort of respond in ways that the game providers didn't intend. They just give you the raw tools and you can create these physics simulations or whatever you want to do fairly easily.
Go ahead.
No, I was just say, you asked about in Unity, and we talked a little bit earlier. I mean, the great thing about Unity from the perspective of a starting programmer is that it's very forgiving, especially due to using .NET. So you get exceptions rather than crashes, and you get some fairly detailed information about what you did wrong. So when you start making your game in our editor, it doesn't bring the whole thing down, and you don't have to spend all this time. You can sort of quickly iterate on your code and get the basics working with a lot of feedback to move forward and to learn from that. The other great thing with Unity using .NET is you can sort of access any standard .NET programming resources, right? So you can go to any sort of tutorials or books or examples and by using a common language like C#, people can transfer that knowledge right to making their game. It's not some sort of proprietary language.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I remember when I was at the you guys had that conference in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
You and I chatted at that, and I remember being in your talk, and you made this one statement that this is kind of when you guys were going public with IELTS to CPP. And you made this statement that you'd be supporting, I think you said, the .NET 4.5 surface area because you guys were, I think, still on 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the bigger claps, like points of applause during the talk. Can you talk a little bit about where you guys are at with surface area?
Yeah, so today with Unity, we're still shipping basically .NET 3.5, 2.0/3.5 profile, and that's what we run on all our different platforms. But I can say at this point we are sort of actively underway on upgrading what we support. The IELTS to CPP was part of that talk because it's sort of a linchpin on moving forward with that, so that allows us to sort of go to all the platforms with an upgrade quicker than porting another runtime there. So IELTS to CPP stabilizing and performing the way we want has sort of allowed us now to sort of actively look into upgrading to a newer .NET profile. And like I said, that's sort of actively underway. And we'll probably put out some news about when that can be expected in the near future here.
Okay, good times. But yeah, it sounds like you still feel like that's something important for your customers.
No, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, we know that people want that. And I mean, one thing is when you say we're going to upgrade our .NET profile or upgrade .NET in Unity, people have different things they want, right? So there's different expectations. And one thing is we need to make sure we understand what people want from that. But one of the things we want is just to be part of the standard .NET ecosystem, right? I mean, there's you guys and there's Xamarin out there. We want to be part of that as well, so that when you grab something standard like a JSON serializer or something assembly, you can just drop that into Unity like you would anywhere else, and we can run with that.
Right. What about so we were just talking about APIs. What about language? Like obviously we had Mads on the show last week. As I think you were probably aware, the C# team is not sitting idle. They're definitely moving forward, trying to figure out what C# 7 is going to be. How relevant is that for your customers? Do they think about language improvements as well?
They do. It's interesting. I think it's slowly evolving. So I think I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems like we started from more of a place where Unity was used as a game engine for game programmers and not so much .NET developers. That was just more of the fact that was the language we were using and the runtime we were using. And today it's evolved more to, we use .NET and are sort of expected to behave like the rest of the .NET ecosystem. And the nice things that are coming in C# are becoming expected more and more by our users.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, we've looked at things like how we would integrate something like async and await, or the different things you guys basically have coming down the pipeline, and it definitely are considering how that can impact our API surface area, the APIs within Unity, and sort of best practices of if you wanted to use that, how would it affect a game differently than maybe some other .NET application.
Right. I mean, one interesting thing is, we obviously work together, and one thing that really hasn't been part of the conversation so far is, I think you guys haven't really asked us for any language improvement. Like, so since we use different runtimes, asking us for runtime features makes maybe a tiny bit less sense, but you haven't really asked for any changes to the language that would be really beneficial in a gaming scenario. Has that ever come up internally?
It has. I think I don't have any concrete examples. I mean, one of the things we talked about was GC. So for us, sort of limiting allocations and preventing allocations is something that makes sense. So maybe having a good way to do access to native memory, or ways to do sort of stack-based allocations in C# would make more sense to us.
Yeah.
Instead of allocating the sort of temporary list and populating it, we could do that with basically temporary memory that wouldn't cost anything in GC time in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I will say now is definitely a good time for that. I don't know if we've been public enough with that, but we're definitely, if you look at a lot of the activity on the CoreFX repo, There's a lot of PRs that are related to no allocation code paths. There's this span thing that we've kind of been working on, which is somewhat similar to what you're talking about, but we're definitely going down this path of, that's right, Mads talked about that last week. Definitely going down a path that's very aligned with that. So I guess that should all be good for gamers.
It's been interesting to read the blog series on what's the experimental like managed OS you guys Midori, yeah. You know, a lot of the same things that came up there come up within gaming, right? I mean, one of the things that I think might make sense also is sort of giving users more control, making more transparent what costs them performance, say. Sometimes it's not really easy to see that when they're writing their code, and it might make sense to sort of show that to them and give them a chance to make decisions, right? I mean, maybe you lose some of the safety, but if the user sort of asserts that, you know, I'm not going to exceed the bounds of my array within this one method, you know what I mean, make sure that they're not being checked, or, you know, maybe turning off exceptions. There's sort of different things that we encounter that does cost us a little bit, and maybe giving users more insight into what that cost is, and then giving them the option to trade that off potentially, I think makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah. So do we have another guest on the call now?
I think they're muted.
Oh, are we not?
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to quickly introduce Stacy Hefner, who is one of our gamer geek residents, resident gamer geeks. You've programmed games in .NET.
Yeah, .NET with Unity. Since I'm coming up on a year now of doing it as a hobby. So huge fan.
Very cool.
Well, and you actually have some games.
Yeah, so I have a couple, 3 small games that we just did to my program with my husband, just to get our feet wet. Now we have a large one that we're doing for fun, but we're going to try and get this into PAX hopefully. So it's been under development since August.
That's awesome.
Any demands to the meeting?
You know, I actually the profile stuff would be amazing. You do kind of hear about little things, reading blogs like you know, GameObject.find is really bad to do, but the actual hit on it isn't clear. So really, what you were describing would be pretty awesome to have. Actually, I did run into a bug that I was going to report, but now I can't think of it off the top of my head.
If you file it, we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things with the sort of profile upgrade is, you know, well, I guess just sort of the .NET upgrade in general we're looking at is sort of how to roll it out without causing the most commotion, right, to our users, because, you know, theoretically it should go pretty smoothly, but, you know, we know that rolling this out across all these different platforms and sort of as far behind as we've been at this point, you know, figuring out the best way to do that so that it doesn't interfere people's workflows too much. So there's a lot of things to consider there with, again, all the platforms we're supporting, you know, all of the sort of people who are downstream of us, like we have our own asset store, and there's tons of sort of vendors there selling content in addition to all the people actually producing games. And then we actually have, you know, dependencies within Microsoft like Visual Studio tools for Unity, and making sure that the debugger experience within Visual Studio keeps working as we make changes and upgrade things. So there's a lot that we're considering as we sort of go forward with this upgrade we're undertaking.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Do you actually use Visual Studio tools for Unity?
I do.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, actually, I was using it before you guys made the push to include Visual Studio with it, so you kind of had to go and install separately. So it's a lot easier now to kind of get that environment set up. I mean, it's great. All of that.
Do you see people using that tooling, John?
Visual Studio tools for Unity?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. I think we had a little problem with it not too long ago, and we definitely heard from the community. So we know there's lots of people using it daily, and let us know when something goes wrong.
Yeah, that's typically a good sign. of
Did
use.
you see a spike in adoption from being included in the setup?
I don't have the numbers on that. I will say that many of our developers, the majority, are on Windows, so it makes sense that they use Visual Studio to develop .NET and use that integrated within Unity. So I think it's very popular.
So what about people who are on a Mac? How are they doing it? You said most of our users are on Windows, so.
Yeah, so Unity historically was a Mac-only product. It started out on Mac, and for a long time now we've shipped MonoDevelop, which is the open source IDE for developing C#. It's different people have different sort of opinions of what they want. You really can't make everybody happy with sort of an IDE or code editor, because some people are happy with something like a text editor, like Sublime, or Notepad, and then some people essentially want Visual Studio with ReSharper on another platform. So we basically ship MonoDevelop today and provide a debugging experience for that, so you can debug Unity on Mac with that. And we also are looking at, VS Code got shipped as well, and we're looking at what it would take to integrate Unity and editing code and debugging code from VS Code on different platforms as well.
So it's a very similar experience to what Xamarin is doing.
Yes. Yes, yeah. We did ship a newer version of MonoDevelop. We had lagged behind a little bit, and I think that our last release we shipped a fairly recent version of that. And again, that will also benefit as we upgrade .NET, because we want to make sure that when you're working in the editor and you're using IntelliSense and other things, that it's targeting a framework that it's actually going to run against. It's getting harder and harder these days to not be running a fairly recent version of .NET.
So I know that Xamarin has a strong and growing affinity for Fsharp.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about that quite a bit. On your side, I'm hearing all about C#. Can you use Fsharp at all within Unity, and do you have any of your customers talking about that?
So we don't support it today as one of our sort of supported languages. We have looked and are sort of very close to making our language support a little more pluggable, so that maybe someone from the community could support Fsharp within Unity. But today we don't have that. We're not quite there yet. I believe our last conference we asked for it, and I know it's something people want and people talk about it, but it's not sort of the majority of people. So I know it has a lot of advantages, and the people who like it are very passionate about it. But I think the last time we checked, the people who actually wanted to use it within Unity wasn't that large.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
I wanted to ask you guys, one of the things we've hit with sort of IL to CPP and our ahead of time compilation is we try to basically strip and remove anything that's unused. I know you guys do something similar for .NET Native. I was wondering sort of how that was going, and if you guys had any sort of future directions on sort of reducing deployment size on AOT platforms.
That's a good question. I know, my frame of reference will come from what we shipped for UWP apps with .NET Native. And so it's probably like at least 6 months old. But basically, I think we got to a decent spot with respect to, pitching code that we didn't need. I know that the team, they have this RDXML kind of, what does the R stand for? I can't remember. This kind of format for specifying how much metadata you want to bring along. I think we ended up going with a fairly liberal policy there, just to make sure that there was a good user experience. So I don't think there's anything super smart on pitching metadata, just to make sure that all those public members are available. What else? I think there's a bunch of ideas that we additionally discussed that we never implemented. So I guess the kind of short version of that is we got to an interesting spot that provided a fair bit of value with reducing images. File size, I think there was still a fair bit of food on the table to do more. And then the other thing is we also came up with this model where we had what we called like multi-file, where the framework would be shared across You could put the framework in one file and potentially share that across apps, and then only put the pieces that were outside of that within your app. And so that had the advantage of reducing individual app size considerably. So that was another axis of work that we did. Make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think it's one of the more problematic places we're seeing today is maybe the aggressiveness of us trying to remove code. Really, I guess maybe it's communicating to the user. So if the user does have a dependency at runtime on reflection or something, or some API that wasn't called directly, it's sort of the best way to communicate that and educate, why it's not there, what the problem was. Because sort of the definition of the problem is if they knew they were using it, they would do something to preserve it, right? So you got to sort of report enough information that they can figure out what went wrong and why it went wrong, so they can fix that later on.
Yeah, I mean, it's more a problem of the worst case scenario is that the reflection usage isn't in your code; it's in some component that you've loaded, and so you don't really understand how that component is implemented well enough to understand why it is you're getting these errors. So that was really the worst. That was front of mind for us in the experience, because if you're the one doing the reflection, then these errors aren't going to be super strange, and you can probably deal with it. Another thing that actually comes to mind is generic instantiations are a big concern for the folks at home that don't necessarily know what that means. It basically means that, so we have list of T as a type in the framework, but we actually have to generate some different code for list of int versus list of string. And so each one of those is called a generic instantiation. Sometimes .NET generics are called reified generics. That's probably what you would see on Wikipedia. So that's what that's referring to. In any case, we generate a fair bit of code for that today. We're sophisticated enough that we can share method bodies between list of string and list of int, but there actually are two different types. And but that's still a bunch of code bloat. And so we are wanting to adopt a strategy where we don't have to generate those different instantiations even in AOT scenarios. So that's something that folks have been working on. I don't believe we have anything finished yet, but that's definitely a direction to make that a more dynamic system. We think that would help a lot. I mean, are you seeing a fair bit of code bloat on generic instantiations?
We do enough. So we do generic sharing for reference types, like you mentioned. So we can share, if it's list of string and list of object or some user class, we do share that. And we do share some sharing with like primitive types. So if it's like an enum and an integer, we have some logic for that. I don't know if it's enabled by default, but we don't have any sort of logic to share value types. So different structures, for example, we generate specific code for each one in that case. And what we see is it doesn't hurt too many applications. The ones that it hurts really bad. So some people write sort of super generic, heavy code that's somewhat recursive, and
which is fun to write.
Yeah, it's fun to write and fun to read the bug reports. But but yeah, I would say the average application doesn't hurt too bad. But there are definitely some use cases where we just what we do today is we just basically stop the recursion at some level. So since we're doing the AOT, we just say once you're 7 levels deep of this nested generic, then we just stop generating, and it does result in some code bloat. But so we have looked at doing sharing of value types, something different there, but we haven't actually released that yet.
Got it. Makes sense. Let's see. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. So game development is, there is a fair amount of code to write in a video game, but most of it is actually assets, right? What does Unity do to manage assets in a game?
Yeah, so those actually are some of the larger sizes when you're doing the game. One of the things we do is we optimize the assets for your target platform. So when you bring in image assets or audio, we're actually compressing it for the target platform for each game. So if you build a game for multiple platforms, you're actually going to get a different format of that asset, in the build.
it's like progressive design in web development, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something we handle. Yeah, so I would say that's the sort of the large thing. I mean, I didn't sort of start in the game industry, so I was in a different space, and then I came to Unity, and yeah, it's interesting to see how much of a game polish is just really good assets, right? Versus programming or something. You can do a lot with a really good artist and a sound designer and a couple different things to really make a game look great and play great.
Yeah.
So I know you guys have done a little bit of open source.
Mm-hmm.
I think more on a combination of Bitbucket and GitHub. Can you kind of talk about what you've been doing there?
Yeah, so we do on GitHub generally what exists on GitHub already. So, for example, our use of Mono is all public and on GitHub, and anyone can see that. We're a Mercurial shop in-house. Unity is. We've used that for a long time. So we use Bitbucket for any sort of Mercurial-based code we publish. And we've just started to do the open source of, I guess, our UI components and I think our sort of high-level networking components. The general thought is we'll have sort of a small, low-level core, and that we would keep, within Unity, and then we open source sort of all the stuff we build on top of that, and put that out for anyone to see and make changes to as needed. One of the things we found is I think you guys know, it's a lot of work to sort of do it right? I mean, so we've talked about open sourcing more things, and we continue to, but just the sort of effort it would take to do development in the open and then reintegrate that back into our internal builds and different branches and making sure all the tools we use to build things and the tests we run on the different platforms, it's sort of a lot more overhead than you expect it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even more than actually just overhead. I would say it's actually a paradigm shift into how you do development. I mean, we're very much still going down that path, but I mean, we're just trying to move everything outside, basically, as it relates to .NET Core, and so because the hybrid model is quite challenging when you have a big product.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's quite expensive. But and I also think there's no handbook per se on exactly how to do it because everyone's situation is a little bit different. And yeah, so just agreeing with you.
Yeah, and I think there's still, I think you're unsure of how much response you're going to get. Like, I'm not sure if you guys got the response you wanted or more or less for everything that you put on, GitHub. I mean, is it meeting your expectations? Is it not? And you don't really know the bandwidth you're going to need after that happens, right? You might get 1 PR a week, you might get 50, right? And that takes a drastically different amount of time and effort to respond to those.
Yeah, I mean, definitely on our side, I think we're quite happy with the response we've gotten. I think it's almost the opposite for us, which is I think we're not quite meeting the expectations of our community in a few spots, and so that's definitely slowing some community contribution, and so our feeling is if we kind of removed some friction in a few spots, we feel like we'd unlock quite a bit of activity. So we're definitely happy, but we feel like the onus is on us to do better.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, and I think again for us, we want to sort of make sure that we can at least attempt to meet those expectations for anything that we do in the future as regards to open source community.
Yeah. Also, there are clearly some smart folks out there. I mean, I always knew that, so it's not like this is some big surprise. But some of the responses from people, like I remember the Ryujit bugs that we had and caused a lot of attention. We had some folks kind of reverse engineering the assembly that we generate and coming to some findings about that quite quickly and suggesting that there were more bugs there than we'd found. And So bright folks.
Yes.
Yeah, believe it or not, there are more smart people outside of Microsoft than inside.
Yeah, definitely.
It's also interesting. I mean, we never really pushed the fact that our the mono we use is out there on GitHub, but I think we probably may have. I mean, I've been with Unity for 4 years now, and I think we've only got maybe 2 pull requests in that time, right? I mean,
Okay.
we weren't publicizing it, whereas our current AutoCPP is not open source at the moment, but just the fact that we're generating C++ rather than sort of machine code has enabled a vast majority of our bug reporters to sort of give us hints, right? Like they look at the C++ code and they say we're crashing here, and I think you guys should do this. So I mean, it's interesting that within a year of us putting out a CPP out there, it's already enabled sort of people, even without the open source community and the setup of expecting that, the feedback we get is so much more because it's just a higher level and enables a lot more people to contribute.
Absolutely. I mean, DLLs or .so files or whatever binary files are a bit of a black box. So I've definitely seen the same thing. You enable people to participate, and they do.
I had a question about, that's not directly related to open sourcing, but I had a question about licensing and how expensive is it for somebody to start with Unity, and let's say I create a game and I want to sell it. How does that work?
I could get in trouble here, but I'm going to guess. Not guess, but so we do have a free version of Unity, so you can go out today and download Unity, and I think there's very, very few restrictions at this point between our free version and our pro version. We used to have some technical features that were only in the pro version, but as of this point, there's sort of very limited things that are in pro that are not in free. And the only restriction, really, I think, is a revenue restriction, and I forget what that number is, but I think it's
100,000.
100,000. Yeah, so as long as you're not doing $100,000 a year more in revenue, then you essentially have full access to Unity and our technology, for free.
That's awesome.
So when it starts not to be free, then you're in a good place.
Yeah, and yeah, it's we have subscription and licenses. We don't have any sort of revenue cost there. So yeah, at least it's a fixed fee if you do hit to that point.
Yeah. If I recall, sorry, I'm going to interject there. If I recall correctly, I think one of the biggest differences between the free and pro, which you're right, in terms of feature parity, it's pretty well there. It's I think there's like a cloud build stuff, and that's one of the spots that's different. But in terms of like the features you need to actually develop a game, they're very well in line now, which was somewhat of a recent change.
Yeah, the motivation was, I mean, especially in the free version, it's really geared to getting towards the independents or smaller studios. There's nothing in there that I would say that would prevent a single individual or even maybe a small group of individuals from making the game they want to make, and that was really our goal, to enable them and not put any blockers in their way.
Yeah, and really with the $100,000 limit, if you do hit that point, which hopefully a lot of people end up doing, the fees to actually license it are pretty reasonable. I mean, that's what turned me on to Unity to begin with. Is it was one of those things where I could play around. I'm not shelling up a whole bunch of money, and if my game flops, I had fun making it, and that was that.
Yeah, so I think the bar for anybody to get started with Unity is pretty low. I mean, because there's the technical aspects are sort of friendly for new users, and the price we just talked about. So we're definitely geared towards getting people involved without much sort of upfront cost, both technically or monetary.
If you could make it though, so that the black skin theme is for the other version instead of the gray, that would be cool.
I will take note of that. We do get that.
Getting really specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing on the .NET team, I think we find that, at least I find, we get pretty busy just feeding the beast, if you will. Just keeping up with our schedule, answering customer questions. I certainly go and talk to customers since I'm a program manager, so I don't find myself writing apps as much as I'd like to. So how's your personal game development activity? What does that look like?
It's not as much as I'd want. So we do try to sort of force that. So I'm not sure if it's still the policy, but before, when you first got hired by Unity, you were sort of required to make a game in the first week and share that out with the rest of the company. But most of the teams at Unity, including our team, takes at least 1 to 2 weeks a year to sort of do a retreat, or get together as a team and sort of reflect on things. And usually part of that is making a game, or at least using Unity in some aspect. So I'm getting better. Like I said, the big thing is sort of the assets. So the first time I did it, it looked pretty sad. The second time, we actually used the asset store a lot more. So you can pull in sort of a lot of high-quality art and sound and things, and you can make the same game, and it looks a whole lot better.
Right. So what was the focus of the last game you worked on?
The last game, we did a pinball game, actually.
Okay.
So we played around with basically sound. So we had the sound when the ball would hit the different bumpers, and we had physics set up. We had like some hinge joints for the bumpers and the reaction forces of the ball bouncing around. And we also, the other thing we do is work in a team. So that works in some areas maybe you're not always work with, like how Unity integrates with source control, how do teams work with Unity to handle conflicts and things like that. So it was a good experience.
Cool.
That sounds like a really nice thing to do. I mean,
yes.
Week-long exercise. It seems like a really good idea.
Hint, hint.
Nudge, nudge.
Oh yeah, yeah. I take it that's directed at me. It is a good idea. So do you, as an employee, can you just take? I mean, I guess you're not making 100,000. Like, I guess could you put up a game on one of the app stores and actually go over $100,000? Do you kind of get free Unity?
I don't know how that works. I know there are multiple employees at Unity that have active games out there that have worked on games before, continuing to work on games. So it's something that's definitely common with the employees. I'm not sure all the ramifications of the money stuff, but I mean it's something that a lot of the employees do is work on games on the side and are actually publishing them to the different app stores.
Actually, that's a good question. Has anyone that you know at Unity built a game that became popular and then quit to focus on the game? Because I know at Microsoft, we, especially when the App Stores became popular, I saw a few people who did that.
I don't know offhand of any who had the success before they left, but I know a lot, not maybe a lot, but I know a number who have left to basically pursue games rather than making the tools for games. I mean, some people, after a while, you make these tools, and at some point you say, I want to actually create with these, right? Rather than working on this piece in the middle, I actually want to make the content for the end. And I know a number of people have left to pursue that.
Awesome.
So did you take your pinball game and put it on Made with Unity?
No, we did not. We shared it within the team, and we'd actually, I think we had added controller support, so we played it like on a Steam box, basically, at a big screen at our sort of retreat together. But that's all the farther it made.
Do you use some of those as sample code that people can download and take inspiration from?
I don't know if any of the ones that came out of the retreats do. That we do have a sort of a dedicated content team that's generating these examples to sort of show people how to do things. The other thing is that just practically Unity is pretty big, and so I don't know all the areas as far as the technology, and I know some of the things I was doing were probably not the right way. You wouldn't want to use this as an example.
Oh, so it wouldn't be best practice?
It would not be best practice, yeah. Some of the areas I'm comfortable with, and some of the areas, we're just trying to get it to work like everybody else.
I see.
Let's see. We're coming pretty close.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, we talked about platforms before. How is the sort of platform expansion of the stuff you guys are putting up going? I mean, how does, I guess, .NET Core, or Core RT, how is sort of the porting going?
It's pretty much taking over the world. It's going. I mean, right now we're still focused on basically one chip, which is AMD 64, x64, and we're focused on, I guess, the three OSs, Linux, Windows, and OS 10. We do have, as we've discussed with you, we do have an IL2CPP-like system. And so that one definitely gives us a bit more potential for platform expansion, but we still do have to port the runtime as well to support that. So we haven't gone down that path right now. So far, we're focused on the platforms that we've committed to for V1. Once we get past V1, then we'll definitely reopen that conversation about getting a bit broader. But right now, I'd say it's a bit more theoretical than practical until this V1 goes out. Make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think there's another aspect, which is, and part of our reason for doing open source is there's now a healthy number of vendors in the .NET space targeting a bunch of different scenarios and OSs and chips. We'd love it to be the case that there was more asset sharing, so that we could kind of together make the whole thing cheaper. So I wouldn't say we've done anything in particular to make that happen other than just open sourcing generally. But after we get our V1 done of .NET Core, that's definitely something that I'll be thinking about more, probably talking to you about, and we'll see where that goes. Make sense?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an exciting future. I mean, we keep following it and trying it out from time to time, but it's interesting to see how it evolves.
Yeah, I know the thing that we have talked about is figuring out what like the .NET Core surface area would mean for Unity. It's definitely an interesting aspect because it's kind of an abstraction level higher than runtime implementation. So we'll see.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're pretty much. Do we get any questions, Bertrand?
Not today. I'm surprised actually. I thought people would have lots of questions, but I don't know.
Apparently, we did a good job of having the right conversations.
There you go.
That must be it.
I actually do think we covered some pretty broad ground. Everything from Stacy soon earning $100,000 in game revenue. To the rest of it. Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you guys
for joining us today. We might actually have some other conversations with Unity on this channel. Thanks to everyone who attended the show today, and next week we are going to talk about messaging, and we're going to have somebody from the NATS team. So that's a high-speed messaging platform that has an interesting .NET client. So tune in next week for that. And this being said, thanks everyone, and we'll talk again next week.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye.